Everyone has an opinion on inflation, but most people have no idea what they're talking about. As an economist who has been interviewed on national television, I know how important it is to be informed when talking about the economy, especially in high-pressure situations. So in this video, I'm going to break down 7 common talking points on inflation, including 3 that will instantly break your credibility if you get them wrong. Number 1. The first one that will cause people to dismiss you is what I call the oxygen problem. If I were to ask you why this lighter has a flame at the tip, you could say it's because of the oxygen. And technically you would be correct. I could light a candle, seal it in a jar, and it wouldn't take long for the candle to consume all of the oxygen in the jar and extinguish itself. But it's also a really bad explanation because the lighter is sitting in a room full of oxygen right now, yet there's no flame. We need to look for the other causes. Some people place the blame for inflation on oxygen, except in the economy, oxygen is greed. You hear people talking about greedflation or companies charging higher prices because they're getting greedy. But greed is like oxygen because it's always around us. Greed also leads companies to cut prices because they know a lower price will get them higher profits. Greed brings high prices and greed brings low prices. So we need another explanation for inflation. But what is inflation in the first place? Some people say it's when prices go up, but that's not entirely true. You can see some prices decreasing even when we have inflation. Imagine life is a giant grocery store and you have a basket to fill. Obviously, you're going to put some food in your basket, maybe get some peanut butter, maybe you get some cereal, maybe you stop by the cash register and see if they have Pokemon cards in stock. They never do. But this is the grocery store of life. This basket holds your phone payments. It holds your house payments. It holds your car payments. Everything that you spend money on goes inside this grocery basket. We all have basket of expenditures and they're all very different. When we're measuring inflation, we create a basket that represents the typical household in the country. And then we ask how much the cost of that basket has changed. If we're always buying the same goods, but the cost goes up, then the average price must have increased. That's inflation. This isn't a perfect way to measure inflation, and economists will gladly tell you why it falls short. For one, I bought a house years ago, so my housing payments aren't changing. But if you rent a house or an apartment, you might have an increase in rent. So you and I experience inflation differently. This basket is capturing the average inflation experience. This basket also assumes that if the price of eggs increases faster than everything else, then I'll continue to eat the same number of eggs. In reality, I will cut back on eggs and eat something else instead. Since this approach doesn't account for me changing my behavior, it will overstate inflation. But there's one aspect of it that some clever people online think they've discovered that economists have ignored. Let's look at that in number 3. This is a misconception that is so widespread that one of the biggest subreddits in the world is dedicated to documenting it. The most common way I experience it is when I open up a pack of Oreos. It seems like every time I open up a pack, the first cookie I pull out, I ask myself, did I get a defective batch? Or have they always been this small? Sometimes companies decrease the size of their product, but keep the price the same. The internet has decided to call this shrinkflation, and even Cookie Monster is tweeting about it. Now, it's not a misconception that shrinkflation happens. It's a real thing, mostly because companies know you're not very sensitive to how much stuff is in what you buy, but you are really sensitive to what the price is. But the misconception is when people say that inflation is actually larger than reported because the products have gotten smaller. When we measure what goes in the basket, we don't say the average American always buys one party size of M&Ms because party size is a made-up unit. We say the average American buys 42 ounces of M&Ms, and if the party size is no longer 42 ounces, we use the price per ounce to get us the rest of the way. Yes, shrinkflation happens, but economists are already accounting for it. But why are prices changing at all? What causes inflation? Number 4, imagine you lived in ancient history before there was money or prices. It's a barter economy, and you trade what you have for what you want. You farm corn and your neighbor farms wheat, and to get some variety in your diet, you trade with each other. Now, suppose a disaster happens on your neighbor's farm and half of his wheat crop just gets wiped out. That wheat is now scarce, and you'll end up trading more of your corn per bushel of wheat. Even though there's no prices, that's inflation. So one reason inflation can happen is a productivity shock. This happened during COVID when supply chains shut down. But this isn't the main cause of inflation because we're good at adjusting to productivity shocks. And if things are scarce, we find out a way to make them abundant. So what is the main cause of inflation? Number 5, let me tell you a parable of a country. In this country, the government needed to pay its bills. Every year, it was difficult for the government to pay, but every year, their workers would take their pay to buy other stuff. One year, the government found a little hack. It realized that it prints the money, so it just took some bills and added a zero. Now the government had 10 times as much money. It paid the bills and even had some left over. But when the workers went to buy stuff, there was the same amount of stuff, just with more money. Prices increased. Now the workers needed to be paid more to survive. Well, the government said, our hack worked once. Let's try again. So it added another zero to the money, paid its bills, and the cycle started again. Each year, the government kept adding zeros until the end, that's all the money was worth. Here's some money from Zimbabwe in 2008. This is a $10 billion bill. It's crazy, but it gets crazier. Here is a $20 billion bill. And no, it doesn't stop there. Here is a $10 trillion bill. I mean, look at how many zeros are on that. And that's about all it's worth. Now, technically, I'm a trillionaire in Zimbabwe if this was still legal tender. Of course, if you have a $1 trillion bill circulating in your economy, prices are also going to be in the trillions. That's inflation. The main cause of inflation is changes in the supply of money. If you look across countries, there's almost a perfect correlation between changes in the money supply and changes in prices. As Milton Friedman said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So what does that mean about our latest round of inflation? Is it a monetary phenomenon? Yeah, that's where we're going to get into our third misconception. Number 6, I'm going to show you a graph, but before I do, I have to warn you, it is one of the most abused graphs I've seen on social media. If you're sensitive to seeing such things, you might not want to keep watching. This is a graph of M1, a one way that we count the supply of money. You'll notice something jarring. There's a really big increase in the supply of money in 2020. Some people share this graph with a tagline that sounds like 75% of the money we use didn't exist 5 years ago. No wonder we have inflation. Don't say this. You'll sound clueless. Let me compare this to something else. You're familiar with the SAT, right? Test to get into college. It's out of 1,600 points. Well, the average score before 2005 was right around 1,000 points. Then in 2005, it shot up to 1,500 and it stayed that way for 12 years. Then it fell to around 1,000 again. Did that long decade produce some of the smartest students of the modern era? Yes. But that's not what we learned from the test scores. In 2005, the SAT added a whole new section and it increased the score from 1,600 to 2,400. Then in 2017, they removed that section and the score went back to 1,600. The change in the average score over time was a change in measurement, not a change in fundamentals. There are a lot of things that count as money, and getting into the details is too much for this video. But here's that same graph included with another way we count money, which is called M2. Notice how the change in that one is much smaller than what we see in M1. That's because we pulled an SAT trick and changed the definition of what counts as M1 in May 2020. When we use M2, which didn't see the change in the definition, we can see that yes, there was an increase in the supply of money over the last 5 years, but it was nowhere near 75% of all the money in circulation. Yes, our inflation today is from increasing the money supply. No, it's not because we turned into Zimbabwe overnight. Number 7. So how do we solve the problem of inflation? The main solution is controlling the growth of the supply of money. Some people want to do that through the gold standard because you can't grow your money supply faster than you have gold. That does come with some costs. Others want to do it through Bitcoin for a similar reason, but also has big costs. Mostly we rely on the Federal Reserve to guide things. But one thing we know for sure is that we cannot stop inflation through increasing tariffs. If anyone says that, they're clueless about tariffs. If you don't want to sound like that, then watch this video next. It has a really catchy song about tariffs.